Let's catch up now on week two at the Miami Open on the women's side, where Arina Sabalenka did win the event. She did beat Jessica Pegula in the final in straight sets, 7-5, 6-2 on Saturday, just under 90 minutes. Pretty comfortable as the match wore on. And she obviously did get awarded her Margarina, which JPEG then went on to steal. But Sabalenka will be delighted nevertheless, because she's had quite narrow losses in her last two finals. Out of the Australian Open to Madison Keys and in Indian Wells to Andreeva. So she's finally managed to get that off her back and come away with another hard court title. She does have quite a solid head-to-head over JPEG, which probably did help. She's now 7-2 in their head-to-head. But Chris, how important do you think this win will be to kind of revitalize Sabalenka now she's got this title, in her trophy cabinet?
I think it was important for her to get a big title. As a world number one, as a player who expects a lot from herself. I think that Australian Open loss did take a big toll on her mentally. I think she really took a hit from that. And I think it's great to see that she's now back playing the tennis that she's best playing, front foot, big hitting, the serve working, and she's winning points or finding ways to win points, even when it's not necessarily going her way. Whereas in the last few months, she hasn't necessarily been finding the answers or necessarily wanting to find the answers or wanting it more than her opponent. It's something she's actually said out loud when she lost to Clara Towson. So I think it's great to see. I think for JPEG, she's lost to her quite a few of these big finals now.
She must be sick of seeing Sabalenka.
Yeah, the worst name to see on the draw sheet. But at least she always makes it to the final when she plays her, it seems. But at the same time, it didn't necessarily excite me hugely because I was expecting this sort of result. It didn't necessarily have the hype that it had of the US Open final, because that really did hit the heights from a tennis perspective. Whereas I think this one, maybe not quite as much, but either way, good result for both of them. And I mean, she's kind of just running away with the number one ranking now as well, isn't she?
She's 3,000 points ahead of Swiatek. Swiatek, losing to Alex Ayala here in the semi-finals, which we'll get onto in a second. But I mean, who do you think is Sabalenka's current top rival? Who is kind of the one most challenging her? Is it sort of Andreeva and
I was thinking Raducanu,
or was it herself, Joel?
Do you know, I was looking at the head-to-head records, and I think she still has a losing head-to-head against Swiatek and against, I think, Coco Gauff as well. And I still think that Swiatek is like her biggest rival. And we're going into the clay season now, which is obviously a real home, a real comfort, really. Well, Swiatek will be hoping that, coming up with the French Open. But, with this performance, the fact that she reached back-to-back finals, I think that she'll be feeling really good in terms of, usurping Swiatek at her home at Roland-Garros and winning a first French Open title. So I still think I still think that Swiatek is probably her biggest competitor when it comes to the clay. I feel like the demons she's battling with herself, I don't necessarily see that much as much at the moment. But it's certainly there. I think she's primed and ready, I think, to do things for a first time even more. And I think that starts on the clay season with a first French Open trophy.
You think that's happening this year, Joel? 2025, Sabalenka?
Yeah. Is that a prediction?
I think so. I think so. I mean, she's streets ahead.
She's the number one ranked player. That's what you go for, Joel.
She is the number one ranked player. But I also think her all-round game at the moment, I think in terms of kind of completeness on the tennis court, she is the most all-round athlete. And that's why it's so difficult for players like Jessica Pegula to really kind of get stuck in and try and press Sabalenka, because there's so many different aspects of her game that can get her through the line. I mean, in the final, quite interestingly, she won 55% of her second serve points. So even when you think she might have a weakness, she's still doing incredibly well on it. She's living up to that world number one billing, which other players like Alexander Zverev aren't necessarily doing. So I think that she can crack and win French Open this year. There we go. I've said it. I've laid my marker out early.
I mean, aside from Sabalenka winning, I think the other big story of the Miami Open on the WTA side was Alexandra Ayala of the Rafa Nadal Academy, shall we just say, going on a bit of a dream run to the semi-finals out of seemingly nowhere. She beat Swiatek in the quarterfinals. I was wrong earlier, but she's had such a cracking week. She's up to 75 in the world now, first Filipina player to do that, and she's really kind of made history for her country, and everyone's got behind her. It's been such a nice story. She's had some fantastic wins, but aside from her being another name we're going to hopefully look out for, and hopefully she'll keep this up, how impressive has it been to see kind of a new player that most people wouldn't have been too au fait with come through and beat, the likes of Iga Swiatek, and how worried should Swiatek be that she came a cropper there?
Oh, I mean, first question, how excited should we be? Very excited. I think we love it when a player breaks through, especially when, they've got they come from a relatively small place. I think it's great to see those stories. And tennis is quite often it's quite an elitist sport in terms of the people who are able to play it, and it's very much focused on certain tennis nations. So I think it's fantastic when you see someone break through wherever they may be from. I think it is great to see. And at this tournament, I mean, what a breath of fresh air. I mean, some of the players that she beat on this run, Ostapenko, Keys, and then Swiatek, I mean, didn't lose a set against any of those players. No one would have predicted that coming in as a wild card. So a real feel-good story there. And then almost taking out Pegula as well. I think that was also particularly exciting, that semi-final. I think that the level of tennis was great. I think the way she's taking on the ball in those big moments is great to see, because she's normally a bit more of a counterpuncher. But against Swiatek especially, she really stepped up and really kind of put her game onto Swiatek, which is probably a problem because Ayala's not necessarily like the biggest hitter on tour. And I think that is the problem for Iga, is she is being hit off the court despite being one of the best movers on tour as well. Lots more mistakes than she would have wanted in that match. So not the result she would have hoped for there, and probably quite symbolic of quite a significant loss in form, and probably a testament to the fact that mentally she's not quite where she needs to be at the moment.
And
Do you think there's a coaching situation going on with Swiatek? She's been working with Wim Fissette, who formerly coached Osaka, since October. They haven't quite got their rhythm together. So, Joel, do you think she needs to maybe change things up? Is Wim Fissette not the right coach for her?
I still think it's early days, and I still think there's just ridiculous levels of expectation put on Swiatek. I mean, her record is still 21-6 in the season. She's still the world number 2. But certainly with the clay season coming up, the stakes are higher, and as you said, it doesn't sound like the dynamic between those two is working as well as it could be. And it was quite interesting to hear Swiatek in press actually talk about the fact that Fissette, while she's on a tennis court, Fissette is actually sending her too many messages. There's too much feedback going on, and she's not able to kind of compute it or process all these messages that are coming towards her. So it just gives you a little insight maybe there in terms of actually there's work to do in terms of that setup, particularly during the matches, that isn't quite clicking, because we've seen Swiatek get flustered, we see her get frustrated, and as a result, it's almost kind of blocking her, I think, from playing her best tennis. So yeah, definitely work to do there.
We don't talk enough about that split that did happen with her previous coach, which was at a very strange time. We didn't know why it happened, because at the time the test result hadn't been announced, and the ban that she faced. And you do wonder what went down there, because at the point of the split, it had not been such a long period since she'd won a title. She had picked up a slam that season, only the singular slam at that point. And it does make you think that potentially that wasn't her choice. That he did part ways with the team as opposed to her letting him go, which makes you think that this is trying to find that magic formula again, which can sometimes be really hard to find, especially when you don't, get off to a great start. I mean, Raducanu doesn't give coaches that long before she gets rid of them in that sense, yeah. And maybe there is something in actually shopping around a bit more before you do settle on someone. Just because they've had great success with other people doesn't mean it's the right match for you. And I think if the clay season doesn't have big rewards, you've got a lot of points to defend. If he doesn't win Roland-Garros, then Iga Swiatek's in a very different situation as a top 10 player and not as an active Grand Slam champion.
Yes. I mean, everyone's got, different needs. Everyone's going to have a different fit. It's not one size fits all, is it? And before we move on, got one question for both of you. Who do you think's been the biggest sort of winner or gainer from the sunshine or swamp swing, as
The
we called it
swamp
earlier?
swing, yeah.
Swing.
One name, Chris.
Biggest winner. Oh, that is a tricky one.
There's an obvious candidate.
You go first then, Joel.
I'm not going to say the obvious candidate, which is Sabalenka, but I would say Emma Raducanu, who was fantastic in Miami, got to the quarterfinals, pushed Jessica Pegula to 3 sets as well. And we didn't talk about it last time, but she was working with Mark Petchey as an advisor, let's say, on in her camp, and it seemed to be working really well for her, and she's put some of the best matches I think we've seen her play since that US Open run. So for me, big winner, Emma Raducanu.
I'll maybe say Paolini for finding some form again. I think this was quite important for her heading into defending a lot of points. I think that's probably a big winner.
Semi-finalist here. Yeah, losing to Sabalenka in Miami. And what about sort of on a negative note, the sort of biggest loser of this period?
Chris, I will add today, it was interesting. Paolini and her coach have split after 10 years.
Well, that is an interesting result, isn't it? I think, well, thank goodness she got a good result this week. But I'd say maybe Coco Gauff probably would be in the conversation around players who maybe didn't perform as well as they'd like to. I think that's also very fair. But I mean, either way, that's the beauty of this part of the season. We do a 180, we head to clay, and then you can definitely pick up some form in some longer matches. They tend to be a lot longer, a lot more physical, and you can rely on the physical strengths that you have rather than just kind of the form that you may not have when you're playing on the hard courts.